Hey Scott, welcome to the Fabled Academy.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
What, in your opinion, is the most competitive TCG out there that we have at the moment?
It's quite a bold question, but it's hard not to lean towards the one with $1.5 million in prize money, really. So it's I got to say Flesh and Blood at the root because it wants to be the game for competitive players.
Perfect. That's also in line with a lot of the other guests that I had so far. But before we dive into this main topic, I want to welcome all of the viewers to this episode of the Fabled Academy podcast, which is actually the 14th episode.
Cool.
My name is Alex, of course. I'm your host, and my guest today is Scott Howling. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you for taking the time.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's always nice to hop on and do stuff like this. So.
Yeah, I think like not that long ago, we were actually in the same room. We didn't have the time to chat with each other, but we were at Prague, actually at the world premiere, and you had an amazing job to do there. How was it for you doing the casting at the world premiere and also at the calling?
Yeah, an incredible experience, quite frankly. I've had the pleasure of doing a few of these kind of shoutcasting events before at this point, but never a world premiere. So it was kind of an interesting journey of learning all those cards within a few days so that I could talk about them on the broadcast when I couldn't talk to them about anybody else with them. And also just getting involved with some of the announcements as well was kind of lovely. I got to announce Armory Deck Aurora. I got to announce the London souvenir package. We got to open gem packs before anybody else. So just a lot of core memories, I think, that are going to stick with me for a long time. So a very special event in my heart. Hopefully you had a good time as well.
Oh yeah, it was such an amazing event. Not only to be like in Prague, the city is amazing, but also the event itself was just a banger. I think the Hunted playing it for the first time was so much fun. And also like exploring the set, I think was so much fun to not only play the cards, but then also see how the other players are interpreting all the different strategies and coming up with solutions for the calling and also for the battle hardened. But I thought like it was such an amazing time to view also the top 8, of course, with Simon Nielsen taking down the calling, which Simon was also here on the podcast a few episodes ago talking about how he made his way along to the finals. And I think just seeing like, as you already said it in the beginning, all of these competitive players, that trying to get an edge on the go was an experience that I've never seen before.
Yeah, I think the world premieres are just a very special event for a number of reasons. Players get to experience a lot of things they have no knowledge about, but also, as you say, for those competitive players, it's a way to really leverage your existing play skill over a room and kind of showcase the power of good fundamentals and just kind of putting them into practice with limited knowledge. And this is not something you really get to see anywhere else or even be involved with anywhere else. So definitely worth making the trip if you ever get the chance. So.
Definitely. I think just Flesh and Blood in general is such an amazing game, such a great community to be in. But you're having like a Pokemon head on, and we will not only talk about Flesh and Blood today, we will also talk about the other TCGs. And quite frankly, you are involved in quite a bit of what we see online. I also saw like I bought my first box of One Piece 2 weeks ago, and I was searching online for what's the best card in OP09. And then I came across your name, and I was like, man, it's exciting to see you.
Yeah, I've kind of fallen into this very lucky position that if it contains cardboard squares, I probably talk about it in my day job. So I'm lucky enough to be what we call the emergent games writer over at TCG Player. So anything that isn't like big three falls under my umbrella. So I still kind of dip my hands into Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! And the like, because you kind of just do it by osmosis when you're surrounded by it all the time. But I have a responsibility to play all the other games. So Flesh and Blood, Lorcana, Pokemon, Star Wars Unlimited, One Piece, the list goes on and on and on and on at this point. But I'll make content about it. I'll play it. I'll do everything I can with those kind of games. So quite the vast wall of experience at this point.
I think you also had a spoiler for Lorcana lately, right?
Yeah, that was a lovely one to kind of tick off the checklist. Something I've always wanted to kind of have the opportunity to do over there. And it's a character that hadn't been seen before in the game either, so the kind of response to it was pretty great from the community as well. And just honestly very blessed, enjoying it while it lasts. So
And then also what I've seen was you recently put out an article about Pokemon, right? Being a little bit more critical about like the financial side of people trying to invest and take advantage of the gains that they can make in the market.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have, especially when it's a platform like TCG Player that are obviously a very retailer-driven platform. But the truth is, there's a difference between people who are, fronting the risk and trying to make a living and trying to run a business and trying to invest, and people that are being actively and like positively malicious, going out of their way to gouge prices or get into fights in Costco warehouses or drive trucks through the front of stores to try and steal product. And that's more the side of things I wanted to address, because unfortunately there has been a pretty severe uptick in that kind of behavior recently when it comes to Pokemon. The scalping problem is getting pretty out of hand. And it's just a very taboo topic. I find a lot of people don't want to talk about it. A lot of people don't want to address it head on. And I just think if we keep treating it that way, then we're going to regret not having done something about it in the future. So if I've got the platform to say my piece on that, then I should, as far as I'm concerned. I should certainly use that for some positives. And it's been well received for the most part. I think a lot of the Pokemon community were very positive about it. But my inbox is also full of many a hate message as well from people I've inevitably pissed off, which is okay. I think that's probably a sign that it needed to be written, because it certainly rang some bells. We'll put it that way.
I have to say, like, it was a wake up for me seeing the article, because I'm not really following Pokemon that closely anymore. But I can remember like 2020, 2021, where I was like very heavily following the Pokemon hype. I also had like my collection of Pokemon cards back then that I've seen like massive gains on, and I was just like so much into the market. But these days I'm not anymore. And so it wasn't really going on in my head. I didn't really notice the hype at all. And it was quite funny, because a friend of mine messaged me also this week, sending me a picture of a base set Charizard that one of his friends found in his basement, and was asking me, do you know the value of this card at the moment? Because in 2021, we were trying to invest in the modern Pokemon stuff. And so he was thinking that I was still into that, but I needed to tell him, like, no, it's not my thing anymore, and I don't have a clue. But then, your article came around. I was looking online, and also like in the LGS where I go and play Flesh and Blood, and I want to play One Piece in the future. The vendor told me like Surging Spark, this new set, was coming out, and he needed to do a raffle at the day we played Flesh and Blood, because there was only like one ETB left of Surging Sparks. And so there were like 10 buyers, and he basically needed to roll the die to see who gets the ETB.
Yeah, I think it's something we've kind of seen time and again at the minute, is that there's just not enough product to meet demand. And I kind of allude to this in the article. I wouldn't have a problem with that if products were just selling out. Like, arguably, that's a good thing, right? The game is incredibly popular, the demand is there, but that's just not what's happening. It's a lot of like underhanded deals. It's people buying pallets from distributors that just never end up at stores they're supposed to be at. It's stores canceling pre-orders and charging 7 times retail, and that's where the issue stems from. But it's hard to really deny the increasing popularity of Pokemon at this point. It's definitely the strongest IP in the space, and for better or worse, people know that makes money, so they will maybe not be the most honest individuals sometimes.
I don't want to make the financial part of TCGs the main topic of this podcast, but I think it's like so important to mention, also because you just wrote the article, and I also want to talk about Pokemon a little bit, because I'm not really sure like how you are positioned to Pokemon in general, because I sometimes see yourself posting pictures with your Pokemon hats, and I'm just wasn't curious, like, when did Pokemon come into your life, and was it like the first TCG for you, or what kind of role did it take up?
No, interestingly, Pokemon was more one that I've picked up since working in the space more than anything else.
Okay.
My original TCGs growing up, I was very much a Yu-Gi-Oh person first and foremost when I was a kid. Most like many of us were. Moved into Magic from there, moved into everything else by extension of Magic. I've always been familiar with Pokemon. I've always been around the scene somewhat. I enjoyed the cartoon when I was a kid, that kind of thing. But my interest in the game has definitely come more from a need for my day job, basically. As a writer with TCG Player, we have to cover every game. That's part of the job. And when it sounds like I'm blowing my own horn a bit here, but my work was being very well received in the middle of 2023, start of 2024. And that means that the people above me want me to write more stuff for more games because it's going well, and so I kind of reached out into Pokemon as a direct result of that, and have kind of been more deeply involved in the scene for the last 12 months or so, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I think like Pokemon is kind of interesting when it comes to TCGs because quite frankly, it's not like the most heavily played TCG, right? And so people are kind of looking at Pokemon from an investment standpoint, from a collector standpoint, for sure from the monetary side. But I had one like opportunity to like meet someone from the Pokemon community actually in when Lorcana was released. Mm-hmm. So, because there was this pre-release event in Berlin where they was showing like the first chapter into like the first 100 Illumineers, so to say. And I was invited to that. And there was also one particular YouTuber that was following for years. His name is like Zero of Time from Germany. He's, I think, the biggest YouTuber when it comes to the Pokemon sphere. He does like a lot of openings and stuff like that. And so I could meet him there, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. Because I haven't seen some of his videos for quite a few weeks, and then I was going on his channel after the event, and I was seeing that he was doing a series where he was going to Pokemon tournaments and actually showing like how the game is played, how many people are there, also what kind of players are there. And I was like, man, that's like kind of the videos that I'm drawn to, and kind of the videos that I was trying to make in Flesh and Blood. So from there on, I really was looking at Pokemon also from a different point of view. And so I'm interested in yours here when it comes to the playing side. Like,
for sure.
Did you play Pokemon a little bit? Did you go to regionals or something like that? Do you know any players?
Yeah. I know a good number of players. I've been at regionals. It's kind of part of the job, truthfully, is to turn up to those events. It's hard to write coverage for them and discuss them in detail without being there. But I do find, as you kind of allude to, the Pokemon is one of those games with a very obvious divide through the player base, for lack of a better phrase. You have people that are die-hard players who very much benefit from the amount of product being opened, that can get cards very, very cheaply and very efficiently because of the sheer amount of product that gets cracked open, and people that are just collectors and want to build collections, invest, as you say. But there's very little cross-pollination, which is very strange. When you kind of work in other TCGs, you get used to people being collectors and players, maybe one more than the other, but they tend to dip their toes in both. And that just doesn't seem to be the case with Pokemon. People pick one side of the hobby to enjoy and very much fall into one of those camps. So you kind of get a feeling for that as you turn up. There's definitely some people who are there with their trade binders parked on a table, 12 binders tall, trying to trade and wheel and deal in the corners. And there's people that are very much in it for the game. And that's perfectly fine. I think Pokemon appeals as a game in the sense if you enjoy a lot of micro decisions, you enjoy taking a lot of game actions, you enjoy consistency. It's definitely something that Pokemon is very strong at as well, because it's designed to be quite easy to understand. Obviously, it appeals to younger children, so things have to be consistent. There has to be a lot of tutor effects. There has to be a lot of cohesion so that the game plan plays out the same all the time, and that's very appealing to people who want to feel like they're the one who's winning the game, not the deck doing high rolling or failing or whatever. So there's some appeal there, and I find Pokemon tends to attract people that enjoy that side of the game space more than anything else.
Yeah, I think like I need to play Pokemon at one point. I have to say I only played like demos at Spiel here in Essen in Germany, and I've never really touched like a real Pokemon deck and gone to a tournament. But that's something I really want to do in the future, also because I think like the opportunities are so big in trying to get to know some of the players, because quite frankly, Pokemon is also pretty competitive.
Totally,
I've seen like the World Championship, right? It was crazy to see online.
Yeah, I mean, the events, there's a gravitas around Pokemon events that make it feel very special. It's like a very esports vibe to big screens, big showcases and stuff. And it's also a fair amount of cross-pollination with top players. If you're looking for a point between Pokemon and Flesh and Blood, you have Sander Neff, who is a huge name in the Pokemon space and known for building decks that no one can comprehend, and that's very much their kind of ballpark. And they're already a national champion in Flesh and Blood. They're incredible at this game as well. And it goes to show you that it's not just a case of people kind of falling in with the IP at a young age and staying there. It's people who enjoy the space and then continue to enjoy the space by branching outwards. Highly recommend people giving Pokemon a shot. it does fill a lot of the niches for me that other games don't. I find that I have to play so many games, things kind of scratch different itches for me. Like Flesh and Blood can be the competitive game when I want to sit down and I want to try and put the work in. Something like One Piece can be more fun on a casual Tuesday with my friends who are maybe not quite as competitive, but they want to play something with me. And Pokemon's great when I've got kids club who are wanting to grow up and move into the space, but they are kids can be some of the most competitive people you'll ever meet. They really want it. They really want it. So like it does work very, very well for that as well. So yeah, if you're looking for something that kind of fills a niche that you don't have filled right now, maybe Pokemon is the game for you. Totally.
Yeah, I think what you're just touching on is so important, right? The kids growing up and getting into the TCG sphere. Just today, I think the RTN article was posted where, like, I think a 15-year-old in France was winning it. It was crazy to see, but it always gets me up the question, like, where are these Flesh and Blood players today are coming from? And we know, like, there are a lot of players coming from Magic the Gathering. Not all of them. Like, there are a plethora of places Flesh and Blood players are coming from. But where are the players from tomorrow coming from? And I think that's a question that every TCG is asking, right? And I have to say, like, for me, like you said in the beginning as well, my first game was Yu-Gi-Oh! And the one that I still love to the bottom of my heart. But I don't see, like, my cousins, for example, really know what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is. They know that there is something, but when it comes to Pokemon, they are all aware, like 100% what's going on. And so I think like the curve that we had in our childhood, that we were entering TCGs with Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not really what all of the children are doing today. And so the question is like, where are they coming from in the future when we are like 50, for example, right?
For sure. Yeah.
And so it's interesting for me to talk about this because we have Disney Lorcana today, we have One Piece, all of these different TCGs that are out there, also on an IP, right? And I definitely think that Lorcana, for example, is one of the games where I've seen the most anticipation to like new players that are younger, or at least like maybe for like adults that have kids, trying to get them into TCG with Disney Lorcana.
Sure. Yeah, I think Lorcana very much has some lightning in a bottle going for it in that capacity. Most other games kind of have this just unfortunate divide that kind of happens by how they've been created and how they've been designed. It's something that Flesh and Blood thrived on early, where it was marketed so heavily as a game, the new old school card game, or whatever the tagline was. And it appealed very much to those competitive Magic players who were disgruntled with the game they were finding themselves in, still wanted national championships, still wanted world championships. And we've slowly been watching as Legend Story Studios has changed their tact and has started focusing more on learn to play stuff at conventions and sponsoring like UK Games Expo this year and having a big old learn to play demonstration over there, because they realized that, okay, we have the competitive market now how do we get our tendrils in elsewhere? How do we expand that into a wider audience? Whereas something like Disney Lorcana very much gets to bank on the two different schools of thought of, you have Disney people who are just always Disney people, have been Disney people through and through. It's kind of just what they love, who would never have looked at a card game shelf in their life before, but they might now because there's something they can relate to on those shelves. And there's also a lot of people who are existing card game players and have desperately for years wanted something their wife might play, their daughter might play, their son might play, and until this point they haven't cared at all. And Disney kind of gives that point of cross-pollination there, that maybe it's something you can finally share with a family member, a sibling, a friend, a daughter, and that then spreads into their friends and maybe their parents and so on and so forth. So these games find different ways to kind of make their way into other audiences depending on their themes, their iconography, what's important to them. But they're all trying to achieve the same thing in roundabout ways. And it's very interesting to watch those journeys and watch how different they are based on the IPs in question.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting to see this year going out because, like you said, all of these newer TCGs, I mean, Flesh and Blood is the oldest new TCG, I think, that we are talking about. But also, like, Star Wars is just going out with their regionals. Disney Lorcana, of course, is going with their first World Championship. One Piece just is heading to its second World Championship.
Yeah, 2 years
and
now.
So
Crazy.
It's super exciting to be a TCG player, but also to introduce other players or younger, how do you call it? Like younger children and people to this game if they are like competitive. And I just recently had a podcast recording with Thomas Rose, who is also a fellow UK player, one of the most known Yu-Gi-Oh players
I'm familiar.
in Europe. And he's actually starting to play Star Wars Unlimited. And I also remember a moment from Spiele from last year where I was playing the demo like every year. I just like to play Star Wars Unlimited, I have to say, even though we don't really have a locals for it. But there was a Magic player that I was playing against with the demo decks. And so he was more drawn to Star Wars because there was also an established player base in his like old Magic LGS. And so I'm really excited, just all in all, for this year when it comes to TCGs.
Yeah, we're very much in another golden age. There is a few things to figure out, some kinks to work out, but the industry is booming in a way that it hasn't since the early 90s. And yes, that will slow down eventually, and I'm sure scalpers don't help, but while that's being the case, we have to enjoy it for everything it is and kind of help it thrive, because competition is healthy. You know, all of these games get better because there are alternatives on the market. No one gets to sit back and rest on their laurels because somebody could be coming for your players if you do, and that's a good thing for all of these games, and it just creates a very set of diverse play experiences that everyone gets to enjoy, depending on their favorite IP or their favorite way to play, and that's great. I love that.
So I think we are on the same boat here, definitely. But I recently made some videos about like the cost to compete in Flesh and Blood, and that's quite recently one of the top 3 highest costs that you can have when wanting to be a competitive player at the highest level. And on those videos particular, there are like 2 sides, I think. There are the ones that also experiencing that and that don't want to pay the cost to compete or that are not able to. And then on the other side, there are like the ones that are also saying like, you know what, this is worth it. This is the way to go. And the other TCGs are going down the shitter. And so I'm interested in your like view on this here.
Sure. This is something I have quite a heavy opinion on, truthfully. It's a conversation that comes up a lot when you're the creator that works for the largest TCG marketplace on the planet, obviously. And I think people need to realize it's a very fine balancing act. All of these card games have an ecosystem. If you want your game to succeed, opening packs needs to be exciting because you need the collectors to be satisfied. You need players to want to buy sealed product. And so they have to be worth something. There has to be some monetary value in the pack. But if it's too much monetary value, well, suddenly you can't find product everywhere because it starts getting scalped, everyone wants to buy it, so on and so forth. If it's not enough monetary value or it's not exciting enough or no one buys sealed product and none of the stores are selling singles, you can't get cards and so on and so forth. It's just gigantic scale that you've got to find the sweet spot in the middle somewhere to make it work. And every game is trying to aim for a slightly different spot on that scale, depending on how much they want to tailor themselves towards the collector's market, the player's market, whatever the priority might be. And I prefer it when games lean towards the player's market, but it can't solely lean towards the player's market. Otherwise, the economy for the game doesn't work, and singles prices go through the roof, and the rest of everything kind of tumbles into chaos from there. So I don't think there's a great answer. I'm really glad no one's paying me to figure it out because it's not yeah. easy to find that sweet spot. I do agree, unfortunately, at the moment, the Flesh and Blood has a bit of a problem, mostly because the amount of growth the game has seen in the last 12 months is astronomical, more than I think they could have predicted, and it's meaning that staple cards are just drying up very quickly. Players aren't eager to sell their sets of Enlightened Strikes or Command and Conquers before a reprint, and there just wasn't any on the market, which starts to cause the reverse issue. The set's out of print, so you can't just buy sealed product, which is another whole permutation on how this equation goes wrong. And I think people very easily just write it off like, well, I want my cards to be valuable when I'm selling them or when I own them, and I want them to be cheap when I'm buying them. And it can never be that way. You have to pick a lane and a spot. And of course, Pokemon can never have cards cost £200 because kids wouldn't be able to afford them. But Flesh and Blood isn't targeting kids quite as much, so that there's another stroke in the other direction. I think, truthfully, maybe Flesh and Blood is a little too far up the scale right now, and we should probably have some amount of reprint equity coming around. There should be maybe a bit more transparency in that regard. But I don't think it's as far off the mark as people want to make believe, because you'll quickly find yourself where Lorcana was in the last set, where no one wanted to open seal product because there's one card in the set that's worth more than a box. And suddenly there's just no reason not to buy singles. So, yeah, it's a puzzle. And sadly, I don't have the perfect answer. But I'm really happy to see these games continuing to experiment with where on the scale they're supposed to be to find that answer. Because if they don't, we never will.
Yeah. So you just touched on Lorcana here, and I think that's also quite interesting to like look at from like the monetary value of the decks, because you can play Lorcana for pretty cheaply, but there's also like this discussion going on of whether you want to play at locals even. And I know that like a lot of people might try Lorcana at the kitchen table, and they might go to these high level events like the DLC, or they are trying to like compete for the world championship, which is like very limited actually. It's quite crazy. I just talked to Din Kang Pham, who won the DLC in Melbourne. And he was just telling me there are just like a couple of spots for the world championship, unlike in Flesh and Blood. So they are more trying to do the Yu-Gi-Oh! Worlds.
I think it's something like 24 players this year for Lorcana Worlds, which is next to nothing really when you think about it. It's very much the top 4 and or top 2 finishers from all of these kind of premier events over the course of the year. And that's a hard slog. That is very much a hard slog. But I find, at least in Lorcana's case, the game is budget friendly enough that the financial costs actually comes more from trying to travel to these events and trying to pay for flights and hotels and entries and stuff if you really want to compete, more than the actual upfront cost of cards, which is maybe a good thing. It's kind of hard to tell, but
yeah, I think like you have to decide on your own, right? How much money you want to spend on playing. And I think like with Flesh and Blood particular, the urge to compete is so high for these people who are already invested like 5 years, right? Most, not all of them, but who we see like strive at the top are playing like for 2 years or more. And of course, there are coming new players, new competitive players in who are joining the circuit. But for those players, oftentimes I hear they are very happy that they are like a collection of cards that I are playing with, not really collecting just for the enjoyment of the card, but wanting to compete at like the callings, the Pro Tours and stuff like that. For them, it's really worth it that they like buy the new sets or buy like new cards, the staples, for example, just like Shelter from the Storm, from the Hunted, and they are just happy about it. And so I think like, even though we are talking about TCGs in general, these TCGs are very different. And that's what I think is like so interesting to look at, even though we are talking about a small niche of game here, right?
Absolutely. I think this is kind of something I allude to a lot for many people. You can enjoy a game of your choice for any number of reasons. It could be the IP, the game experience, the price point, anything that appeals to you. Absolutely. But you should always take a moment to kind of just look at the bigger picture of what that game is trying to achieve, because it should give you, a very clear image as to what the decisions they're making are rolling towards. And we see that with Flesh and Blood time and again. There is a want to keep cards at a high value because competitive players don't want to be rebuying in. They want their investment to be worthwhile and the like. And the meta game doesn't rotate anywhere near as fast because of the Living Legend system. So if I bought into Viserai 2 years ago, well, I can still play Viserai now, and the cost basis hasn't really changed all that much. The cost obviously changes if I choose to play a different hero, but that's my prerogative. There's never an obligation to do that like there would be in a game like Magic with rotation or something of that ilk. And I think if you don't necessarily enjoy the kind of trajectory or pathway of any game that you're playing, it becomes very obvious what their end goals are, and it's up to you if you want to step away and explore something else. And that's one of the benefits of this golden age of TCGs. There is alternatives. There is absolutely something that fits closer to what you're looking for. And if you want to compete in any card game, there's definitely a way. It's just where your price point lies, how much you're willing to commit to time, and I guess more than ever, maybe, how much you're willing to integrate yourself into the scene. Speaking to players like Simon in Prague and the like, it's like, well, once you get involved in the community, well, everyone lends cards. Everyone. We all pass decks around. I've lent $800 decks to brand new players because they don't have any cards of their own to play with. But I wouldn't have done that if they hadn't come to meet me, say hello, shake hands, turn up to armories every Tuesday, Friday night, whatever they might be in your local area. There is a means, there is a method. It's just if you're willing to put in the graft to do that.
Yeah. I think you are also touching on a very important part about playing TCGs in general, and that is your local community. If you are not like a player like Din Kang Farm, for example, who is aiming for the world championship, then your local scene is like the most important cornerstone, right? And if you have a really active One Piece community, for example, and you have only 4 Flesh and Blood players on your locals, then of course, maybe you are more drawn to One Piece because there's already a big established player base. Maybe they are traveling also together and stuff like that.
I think that depends on the person, really. I think for some people, they're going to sit there and go, well, a One Piece community exists, and I just want to jump into that community and get involved. Some people will look at the 4 Flesh and Blood players and go, I can grow that. I love this game. I can make that bigger. But that's not for everybody. And again, that's kind of the beautiful part, is you can pick what part of your local scene you want to fall into. If you fall in love with a game that has no local scene, well, guess what? It has a local scene now. You're player number 1. So how do you have other players come and join you? There's no obligation ever to jump into a game because the local scene exists. But if you're looking for a game and you have no preference, then turn up to your local game store, see what people are playing, ask them why they enjoy it, and maybe you'll find yourself falling into a community quickly.
Yeah. So what is really your local community like? What are you going to regularly?
So unfortunately, I kind of live in the middle of nowhere, which does make it a little hard for me to get to weekly events. But I'm lucky that I do have some local groups of friends who I have either taught to play games in particular that can just come to my kitchen table or to a local store, or I will travel for the middle of the ground events, be it set championships for Lorcana, maybe Road to Nationals, ProQuests for Flesh and Blood, this kind of thing. I will primarily find myself playing Flesh and Blood and Lorcana more than anything else, because Flesh and Blood is my competitive game. It's always been my competitive vex of choice since I started playing. Lorcana, there's just a much bigger scene in the north of England. It's very easy to travel to stuff at a last minute notice. Set championships take 4 weekends, so there's always a window to find something. But I play plenty of Star Wars Unlimited, plenty of One Piece with local smaller groups of people who love those games, and I will go out of my way to travel to their events if they don't conflict with another card games events, because unfortunately there's only so many weekends in the year, and I can't get to everything as much as I might wish to.
Yeah. So when really we talked already about your beginnings in TCGs, but like when you don't have that big of a local scene, like what really sparked your like enjoyment for going deeper into the TCG community?
I've been in the trading card game space for a very long time. It's bordering on 15 years now since I first started picking up content, playing games for myself when I was much younger. And to be very raw about the situation, I was a very nerdy kid. And back when I was a kid, that wasn't a good thing. Nobody invited you to things. You were mercilessly bullied for your hobbies. Thankfully for me, I found a very small local game store in the back of a beaten up warehouse that was run by someone who was basically selling stock online, but because that stock had to be somewhere, they might as well stick some tables in the place that it has to be and run some events. And if that store doesn't exist and I don't meet the people I meet there, I don't have those formative experiences, I don't learn from their life experiences, I don't get out of the house once in a while, I'm not the person I am today. I don't learn the life lessons I've learned, I don't go to half the places on the planet I've been to, and I certainly don't have my job. I don't get to work with these communities day after day without those spaces. So for me, the goal has always been to make sure those spaces continue to exist. It shouldn't matter if you're a nervous beginner or a chiseled veteran, you deserve to have a place at the table. But that means that somebody has to make sure there's a table. Because if there isn't, no one gets to play. So that's been the driving force for me the entire time. It's just those more than ever, people need a way to escape from reality in this current day and age. So I have to make sure they can. Because someone has to make sure they can. And I know that I needed it when I was younger. So for me, it doesn't matter how small the scene is, 1 person, 4 people, 0 people. If you are interested in a game and I can find a way to let you play it and have a better evening as a direct result, that's all I want. That's all I've ever asked for. And that's all the motivation I find myself needing to get up and write an article every day. And that works wonders for me.
Man, that's an amazing journey you're on. I have to say that's so also an inspiration, I think, for maybe one or the other viewer here on this podcast.
Thank you.
And I think you are doing just an amazing job, I have to say. I was so excited to talk to you that's why I also wanted to make this pod really with you here, because you can talk from so many different directions, but also your background was so interesting for me as well. And I think it's very clearly now where your passion comes from. But I can also relate in a way, because I was growing up in a city where we didn't really have an LGS. And so we were playing at the schoolyard, of course. But I was always dreaming about that store to go to and maybe play like tournaments or meet other players. And my like opportunity really only came when I was like 15, 16, when I discovered an LGS and rediscovered my passion for Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I was like on the go, and we were going to YCSs. And I have to say, this was like one of the best experiences I had in my life, not only as a nerd, right? But also like you experience so much, and you kind of become another person when you're going outside of your basement, your like kitchen table, collecting cards on your own, or playing with your best friends, to like going to an LGS, going to YCS, or calling these days, and experience TCGs as a lifestyle that you haven't really imagined before. And I think that's just the beauty of this hobby.
100%. Play the game, see the world, as they say. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Any old, raggedy, beat-up table can be the foundations on which you build the rest of your life. Like, if you want to explore the world, you want to play games with people, you want to be part of something bigger, the TCG space, honestly, the tabletop space as a whole, it doesn't have to just be card games. It can be miniatures, it can be board games, it can be whatever you prefer. But there is always a space for you. And the more people that get to find that beaten up table to then do the rest of the journey, the better. And that's where I stand on the matter. And it's clear that I'm right, because you had a similar experience on the way up. And without those places, without those basements, without those schoolyards, we're not here having this podcast episode today.
Definitely.
So it's well worth doing, in my opinion.
So I think really one thing that we kind of came to is like this beauty of being in the TCG space as a hobby, but also like creating content or even making it your job, as you do. But how do you really view this year? Because we touched on a few very important events taking place this year. Star Wars Unlimited having their like regionals, Lorcana having their first World Championship, One Piece, Flesh and Blood, of course. Like, what is really like the outlook that you have for this year?
For most part, I have a pretty good one. I think it's mostly positive. There is definitely a few outliers. The Pokémon article that's been previously mentioned, and over the course of this episode, but people just seem to be excited. There's a lot of firsts to look forward to. It's the first Galactic Championship for Star Wars. It's the first World Championship for Lorcana. It's not quite the same, but even the 5-year anniversary just gone for Flesh and Blood was very much that kind of crescendo of look at everything that got us here kind of situation. And even if you look at One Piece's upcoming releases, you have like 2nd-year anniversary boxes with dedicated promos and stuff, and people just want to celebrate. They want to make the most of what's happening in their space, and that's great. I think there's more opportunities to compete than ever before, which creates a lot of interesting content opportunities, be it the best deck style content, be it budget content, be it anything that kind of falls into the competitive space. But there's also a lot of just onboarding opportunities, as we kind of see more and more from games like Flesh and Blood. They're turning up to, Comic-Cons and stuff like this and having big learn-to-play booths. And it means that people that are just kind of wandering past have the ability to jump in for the first time. And this was just not something that was happening before for a lot of games. I guess just the overarching feel for the year is pretty positive. I think we're heading in a good direction. I think the industry is, as a whole, is building a lot of growth. I think, truthfully, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the one that stands out to me that maybe needs to work on that a little bit. Master Duel is coming up a bit short in terms of onboarding new players. It isn't quite having that level of turnover. So I'd love to see a little bit more from them. But as a general, like, paint everyone with the same brush kind of attitude, I think it's looking pretty great.
What are then the events that you will travel to in this year?
Well, what won't I, is the question. Things that kind of immediately come to mind, I will be at Flesh and Blood Worlds, which is obviously undetermined as to where in the US. I will be at Pro Tour Singapore. I will be at Pro Tour London. I will be at the Galactic Championship for Star Wars Unlimited, which is great. I might be at Worlds for Lorcana. That's still... We're working that out. There's some logistics to figure out. I'll be at basically every kind of local level qualifier style event. I'm hoping to be at a couple of Bandai card fests for things like the Gundam card game, for things like One Piece,
Yeah.
And they pop up all over the world over the course of the year. So, yeah, I think I will probably spend more weekends on the road this year than I will not, because it's just too many things to travel to. Hopefully, I'm working at a few more of those in terms of casting, like I did in Prague, but we'll wait and see. But yeah, I mean, just everything. I will be at everything is probably the most concrete answer I can give you.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the articles that you will write there, and also to the commentary that we will see you on. It is really like this, like how do you call it in English? The composition of these two sides. We talk about this like very heavy competitive, like tournament-filled scene of TCGs, and then we have on the other side like these kitchen table players, these casual players. And I have to say, even though we talked about what is the most competitive TCG out there right in the beginning of the podcast, I really have to say I didn't think that there are that many casual players in Flesh and Blood or kitchen table players. And at the Calling in Prague, I played the Battle Hardened, I played the World Premiere, I played the Calling, and I met so many casual players there just wanting to enjoy the new packs, the new cards. And I talked to so many that are also telling me, like, you know what? I only play limited. I like to play draft. I like to play sealed. And I was like, I'm not alone on this world.
No,
that's crazy.
No, I think it's something I actually want to give a huge just shout out to Legend Story Studios for over the last, like, mostly 2 years or so, maybe a little bit longer at this point. Because the game was originally, as you very well know, very much marketed on the, we want all the competitive players. We want to be a competitive game first. And there was nothing wrong with that. They did a fantastic job at marketing the game that way. It pulled in the right kind of audience that the game needed at the time. But a game could never live on established players forever. There has to be an onboarding experience. There has to be ways for people to come and get involved. And products like the First Strike decks, things like the Learn to Play booths, these kind of opportunities that just didn't exist before have done a fantastic job at introducing Flesh and Blood to a casual audience that just wasn't there before. And we're seeing those results recognized in real time. As you say, people just at Prague, where it's, this is my first big event. I'm traveling because I enjoy playing limited, or actually this is my first set, and I want to come and get involved and see how it looks like from there. And people just, more people playing UPF than ever for big events and side events and stuff. There's something very magical about just like going back to the hotel room after like being on commentary for the whole day, and you walk into the lobby and it's just full of people drafting. It's just people haven't stopped playing games. They've been kicked out of the venue and they are still playing games of Flesh and Blood. And that's very much a side effect of this kind of new attempt to encompass more of the space than just the competitive side.
Yeah, definitely. And it's something that is, I think, overlooked when you are trying to find your TCG. Because when I talk, for example, to Thomas Rose, Din Kang Pham, or other players that are like trying to switch from a game or that are trying to get their foot again into a TCG, this outlook on Flesh and Blood from the outside is often like, oh yeah, there is this huge competitive scene, but there's also the cost for these decks that you need to compete. But then on the other side, like, I think it is overlooked that there's also this more casual side of the game, and also there's the limited play. And I asked Thomas Rose, for example, specifically because he is also a lover of the limited format. And he was like, I wasn't really considering like if I want to play Flesh and Blood as a limited format. And he was looking at Star Wars Unlimited. This is the game he chooses now. But I was telling him, you know what? There are limited callings in Flesh and Blood as well. So I think the opportunity is there also for players out there who are not wanting to play constructed in Flesh and Blood to then maybe go out and try out the limited format and even go to a limited calling.
For sure. Yeah, I think even if the concern isn't limited and it's more of a cost-based concern, we saw the first commoner Battle Hardened last year. And I love the idea that I can play a commoner event for gold foils and PTIs and like the most prestigious prizes that are available in the Flesh and Blood space. My commoner deck is $23 or something, to build from scratch, and that's all it took for me to kind of get to play in that event. Well, that's Pokemon levels of budget, so brilliant. So hopefully we see more and more ways to kind of bridge the gap. I love Classic Constructed. It's just, for me, the peak way of playing Flesh and Blood. I love competing in the format. But there's a need for more of these limited events, more of these alternative formats to kind of continue that onboarding that's been done so well so far.
Yeah. And I think it is also like not that easy to have that wide of a range of formats and also of tournaments, of course. But I think like LSS is doing an amazing job, also like trying to provide something for everybody. And we see that, quite frankly, that people are catching on to it, even though I think like in the last year in Rosetta, there was also a limited calling here in Europe, right? That, of course, the attendance, the amount of players who go to such a tournament is not as big as a classic constructed one, but there are still players out there who want to compete in that.
I'm not even sure that's so true anymore. If we look at the first ever like double calling weekend that was a couple weekends ago,
now,
which is, first of all, that's insane. How are we at a point where we just have multiple callings on the same weekend and a battle hardened? But that's such a testament to the growth and the size, because we had enough players to fill out a classic constructed calling, a limited calling, and a battle hardened in the case of the same weekend, and there was enough demand for all three of those. So you're not like missing out on part of the experience by wanting to prioritize limited. In fact, you're maybe getting the same experience as the constructed players and a little something else on top. So yeah, I think it's a great avenue to explore. I wish the viewership numbers were a little bit better. I think a large part of the stall on wanting to push more limited content for LSS is that the streams don't do as well. People aren't interested in tuning in. And I have to wonder if there's a way to solve that. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe the answer is just no. But people are always more interested to see brand new heroes and classic constructed. It just pulls in more views, and so it does take precedence for those reasons. I would love to see maybe some exploration done as to how we can make a limited broadcast more exciting to watch, and see if that's something that can be fixed, because I think there's a lot to gain by pushing limited at the forefront of the format. So
I think like what you're just saying is one of the like major points of why limited is not that popular. But it's also my experience that I had, because when I was coming back on YouTube and I wanted to make content, I was playing the whole year nearly only limited. Even though I have like a KO deck for classic constructed, if I find the time to go to locals, I try to go to the limited ones. And I was trying to do limited content, but it was really devastating. Like there was sometimes not even 100 views coming in, and it's difficult. Actually,
this is a long-term issue really for card games, and that's why I don't think there's necessarily a great solution. The truth is, and people might not realize this, but if you want to get people invested into your content, they care about the narrative, they care about the story. That is the benefit of these kind of broadcasts, is that if I can show you the journey of Pablo Pintor, who you're obviously very familiar with at this point, you know their story, and it's like, well, if Pablo has a good run at this event, well, great, I can tell Pablo's story. If we feature Pablo and someone crushes Pablo, well, then I get to feature the person that crushed Pablo as the Giant Slayer, and I get to talk up their narrative and where they're from, and this underdog from the underground who might have their first breakout event this weekend. And there's just something to get invested in. There's something to care about. The problem with limited events is that I didn't see this person build their deck. I didn't see their draft. I don't know anything about their event so far or why I should care. There's just a very obvious disconnect in the narrative journey. So people don't feel the need to tune in, to watch, to study, because they can't take the lessons they learn and apply them to their own games, because their draft deck is never going to look the same, their sealed deck is never going to look the same, and they can't ever follow the entire journey of a player because they didn't see the draft, they didn't see the sealed deck building portion, they didn't see everyone else's draft in that pod to kind of enjoy what's going on there. There's just like no good way to show these things, and I think that's always been a big part of the problem. There is viewers can't invest as deeply as they can in a classic constructed event, and I think if someone can solve that for limited and make it a better viewing experience, you have a gold mine on your hands. It's just, how do you solve it?
I think actually the teams who are doing the casting production for Flesh and Blood are trying their best. I think Savage Lands, for example.
Yeah, well, we had it in Prague, obviously. We had several featured drafts for those players, tried to keep those players on. So steps are being made to try and solve that problem and figure it out. I just don't think the solution is quite there yet. But trust me, one of these days, when people can become more invested in limited, I think we're onto a winner. It's just when that will be is impossible to know.
I also think for limited, when you are joining into the game and you want to see just some games, the possibilities of just watching classic constructed, for example, are so much easier than to tune into limited, because you have to really understand what's going on, right? To be excited about the content even. Yeah.
There's definitely an extra layer of knowledge required to appreciate limited, because you can't just understand how the game is played. You need to understand the intricacies of the format, why this card being played here is particularly more impactful than if it was played later, or why picking this blue card was important instead of picking a red card. And these aren't intuitive pieces of knowledge to a brand new player who tunes in and watches the draft. And yeah, on commentary, on shoutcasting, we could do a good job of explaining why, but that's still only words from our mouth, not a visual like gear turning moment for those players where it's a moment of understanding. They're getting told, not shown, which I think is probably the issue in that capacity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's definitely some angles of attack to take if you want to make better limited content. I just don't think it's currently seen as being worth the investment to really go at it. It's very much a passive, well, we'll try this and reevaluate it, and try this and reevaluate it, and eventually we'll get there, but it's just not a priority, I think.
Yeah. Also, when we are comparing like the different games, not every game has a limited format even. And so it's quite difficult even when you are looking at the wide broad of the TCGs. We have Star Wars for sure that has like this draft portion, right? We have Flesh and Blood, Magic for sure, but then we also have games like One Piece, and we have games like Yu-Gi-Oh! That don't care about limited at all.
Yeah, that's always been a bit of a turn-off for me personally. I like being able to just turn up, buy a box with 7 friends, and make a good evening of it. And having card games that don't support that, sometimes it's just not always optimal. I think even though Lorcana has a limited format, it's up until now not been very good. It's very much been a case of just, this card is obviously great, just play that one. Colors don't matter. You kind of lose the intricacies of Constructed in the limited format, and no one really cares outside of playing the format casually. I think that's a bit of a shame, but I also don't think games like One Piece can necessarily support a limited format. They're just not designed to make that function. We kind of saw their early attempts when it came to pre-releases and being able to select a leader ahead of time, and they just weren't particularly well received, which is a shame. But I also think it's a good thing that they've been able to identify their game isn't necessarily suited for that and prioritize supporting other aspects. And it kind of leads back to that message we've given the whole podcast is, if you want a limited format, there are games for you to go and enjoy, and you can enjoy Flesh and Blood's limited format and not give a toss about Classic Constructed. If you want to go play Pokemon Constructed, some Fab Draft, so that you've got a way to play both, great, there is now options for you. And I think it's better that way than every game trying to do everything. So
yeah, that's for sure. When I look at like this year, I'm very excited for all the different world championships, I have to say. And I'm not sure yet which one will be like the biggest one, but for sure what I've heard is that Lorcana is cranking up the value on the production like heavily. And that's like so exciting to see from the outside, even never having been to one of the events myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information that isn't public yet when it comes to Lorcana Worlds this year, which is a bit of a shame. I know people are obviously waiting for that information to come to light, but we've seen from Melbourne and a few other events recently that, the Disney money is there, is probably the best way I can put it in that capacity. And, I mean, the North American Championships and the European Championships were both at Disneyland's. You have the World Championship at Disney World. I mean, can you imagine the winner's photo outside the castle? To see a trophy with the castle. It's just going to be one of the most iconic winner's photos of all time. And that's kind of a pedigree that only Lorcana can achieve because of the IP that's behind it. And that's very cool. I think one of the big disconnects in the space for me has always been the inability to share your success in card games with people who don't play them. It's why national championships have been so important, because, if I won a Pro Tour, my parents don't know what that means. They have no idea what a Pro Tour is. Yeah. There's no frame of reference. But if I won a national championship, if I win a world championship, there's a moment of recognition there. Kind of relying on that to kind of bring other people into the space and enjoy those successes with you has been kind of great to watch. And I'm also very excited to see how it plays out this year.
Oh yeah, definitely. The part of like getting recognition and even talking about your hobby to other people who are not in the TCG sphere, I think these days is much more easy than like what we talked about in the beginnings. But definitely like these bigger achievements or these bigger tournaments specifically are opening up the conversation. I think though, like honestly, I have to say like chess, for example, is something that I hear often is compared to TCGs. And chess had a big boom in the last years where basically like all of my friends that don't have anything to do with TCGs suddenly were playing like chess all the day on their phone and knowing everything about like the top chess players. And that was like, just like sliding besides me. I haven't really noticed it, but I was like thinking about it, and also something like that happened with TCGs, right? More on the collectible side, on the investment side, but I can see like that the playing side opens up also through those players that are now chess a lot more and kind of see the difference maybe and the possibilities.
I think it's amazing what can happen when something is picked up by the mainstream conscience, which is definitely what happened with chess. Kind of just pushed it to the forefront. All of the biggest Twitch streamers were focusing on it and the like. And as you say, we've seen that was the collectible side of the hobby somewhat, especially in recent memory. It's kind of been picked up by the mainstream. But we're not too far away from that happening to the player side. There are recorded cases of world champions winning their games world championship, and then they're in the local news and they're on the TVs, and I've even seen them on like advertisements on buses and stuff in smaller countries where it's seen as a more prestigious achievement because there's just less opportunity to gain that level of recognition. And so there's clearly a want to celebrate it, which is not something that was there 15 years ago. It was very much more of a hobby that was kept quiet. But I think now, thanks to a lot of like just pop culture, a lot of TV shows shining a light on things. You look at Stranger Things showcasing Dungeons and Dragons and all this kind of stuff. The general worldwide consensus is just a more positive one, I think, of the tabletop gaming space. It's less taboo than maybe it was before, and that kind of leads to, if the right person finds success, it will be celebrated on a grand scale, and then the floodgates are open. The first time that somebody is publicly recognized for winning a world championship, every game is going to want to give that to their world champion, and the bar gets raised again. And I don't think we're too far away from something like that happening, honestly, because we just seem to have bigger and bigger world championships, and suddenly they're at Disney World. So,
I think the Disney aspect of it, I just love to see it. I also
Me too. I love it. It's crazy. But you have to imagine, right? Like whoever's getting that winner's photo taken outside the castle. Well, everyone who's at Disney World that day is going to want to know why that person is holding a photo in front, a trophy in front of a castle, and suddenly the conversation happens, and everything slowly spins from there. And how cool is that? I love the idea that somebody might stumble into Lorcana because they saw someone posing with a trophy and went, "I want to be that," and that's a great story to me. So
yeah, I also feel like we need to talk about the comparison between competing in TCGs and competing in sports, because it's sometimes I found it like pretty astonishing that in some cases you can make much more money being a TCG player on the side when you have a main job than being a professional athlete. And it's crazy to me that we are in a situation like this and like no one talks about it. But I'm curious to hear your opinion on like the differences and the possibilities, the similarities between like TCGs and sports.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of a weird kind of similarity while there being a disconnect, because I don't know of many people that go into sports for the EV. That's not really how that works. Like, there's numerous people that go into the trading card game space because I can make money doing this thing. And I don't think it's a healthy attitude. It's like trying to play poker for making money, but it does exist. There's definitely that kind of mindset there, where no one's ever trained to be a 100-meter sprinter for the profit. That's just not a thing that happens there. So there is definitely similarities, but I think it kind of has that disconnect in a sense. I think people go into sports for the prestige or for personal achievement, or there's way more of a gravitas around being the fastest man alive, the fastest woman alive, these kind of titles you can grant people, and there is like good at children's card game. It's not quite as appealing a title when it comes to people that want the glory necessarily. But we're seeing those things get closer and closer. As I say, as we gain more mainstream popularity, more of an understanding, card games are an elaborate sport, if you want to think about it. They're a mental sport in the same way chess was, and it is, truthfully. And there is definitely teachings that can be applied to both. I find myself in recent years spending so much more time studying sports psychology and trying to especially coach people in that vein, where it's about taking care of your body. It's about understanding that you are a machine, and if your brain is operating at 50% and your opponent is operating at 100, you're way more likely to make a misplay than they are. And In a game like Flesh and Blood, the last miss play is the only one that counts. So if you're, if you're at 100%, you're way less likely to make that. And I think slowly but surely, these two kind of different goalposts that were arguably just very misaligned early on in the 2000s are just learning from each other. Just kind of picking up little bits and pieces from the other industry to better inform how they could be doing things that they are slowly learning about. Because slowly but surely, we're getting people that want to go into sports because their icon, their role model plays that sport, and they want to get involved for that reason, and they need a point of access. And slowly but surely, we're getting people that want to go into card games for the prestige. So that we need to learn from each other, and I think that is happening in real time. But as you said, I don't think anyone's really talking about it. I think it's quite kind of quietly happening under the carpet, which I think I'm mostly okay with. But it's very interesting that it doesn't seem to be drawing quite as much attention as maybe it could.
I feel like this topic is really overlooked. And I'm very amazed that you are also bringing this up, that you like try to take time and like learn all of the different stuff also about the sports psychology. And I also feel like the one like line that like connects sports and also TCGs is the competition aspect. Like you said, there's something to like be the world champion, be the one that is making the one deck happen, for example. And I feel like a recent podcast that I had with Daya Todesco, who piloted Jarl to the Battle Hard in Geneva. And he is a personal trainer. And I was making the pod with him, and he was telling me that he was at some point, I think when he was 11, he was qualified for Olympics. And then suddenly an accident happened, and he couldn't compete anymore at the level he wanted. And then he discovered, of course, knowing like Magic the Gathering, this competition aspect in Magic the Gathering. And so he was like, you know what? I can compete at a sports level to a certain degree until I'm age X. And then basically the competition, of course, I can compete in my age group, but I can never be the fastest man alive when I'm 50, for example. Just one example. But you can be the world champion in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can be the world champion in Flesh and Blood when you are 50 or 60 or whatever. And so this is one of the aspects, I think, that for people that want to compete and love the surroundings of being in a competitive environment, is that TCGs or playing chess, for example, can deliver to you. And I think like TCGs in general have this like fastly mentality of competing against so many different people at once that other sports event may not even being able to give you.
I think there's definitely some things to take away from there. I think you can totally find an alternative passion that gives you the ability to compete. I mean, one of the most famous ones, you look at Gordon Ramsay, the chef, who regularly goes on record as being wanting to be a footballer, wanting to be a sportsman in that capacity. He took an injury that prevented him from doing so. And he fell in love with food and kind of pursued that pathway as a result and became arguably one of the best chefs in the world. This is a similar kind of story. And I just think there is maybe a human condition, but definitely something that is in the mind of competitively inclined people where you want that adrenaline rush. You want to feel the heartbeat in your ears because you're doing something where the stakes are high. It feels like it matters. It feels like it's important. That can be card games for you, evidently, because we have tournaments, we have world championships, but it's also kind of cool that it can be just about anything that you want to compete in, because everyone has different passions and different loves. But I kind of agree with you. The more and more we're finding people gravitating towards the trading card space, because you look up on billboards in Japan and see $1.5 million prize money across a subway tube in Osaka. And suddenly, you don't need to know anything about card games or Flesh and Blood. You just need to know that that's a lot of money. So how do you get involved in that, and how do you get the chance to compete for that? And suddenly, people are playing card games that would never have looked at a shelf of cards 15 years ago. And I think that's just another one of those signs of growth from how far the industry has come.
Yeah, definitely. I think like it is an amazing time to be alive, to be in the TCG atmosphere. But also, I want to know your opinion on this. That like the sports aspect and the like things that you can learn from that that you touched on yourself. What are the things that you want to know get the knowledge out there for people listening here? Like, is there a point that you want to make?
Yeah, I think there's two kind of schools of thought that I would encourage you to follow. And there's a lot of sports psychology that I think is worth studying if you're interested in improving that side of your game. You can go into the physical route, which if you listen to players like Matthew Folks and the like, have always been very vocal about the need to do this. And the idea that your body is a machine and you are trying to program it to achieve one task. That task is win a calling. Then you should be maintaining the machine to be as fluid and optimal as possible and control your eating habits and your hydration and similar levels. There's a lot of psychology that exists around that, especially in the like sprinting spaces, because it's just very well studied and very well documented. But you can also go down the route of like mental health, which I think is something that is explored way more in the sports space than it is in the TCG space. Because people struggle with tilting, they struggle with frustration, they struggle with losing a game that mattered, and I think a lot of people are always very fearful of the idea they can be playing a single game of Flesh and Blood for $25,000 or more, and if it goes your way, then it's a huge dent to the mental psyche, and how do I play under the feature match lights without getting stressed? And these are a lot of things that I actually would really love to spend more time talking about myself, because I don't think there's a lot of coverage in the trading card space, but there is a lot of coverage in the sports space about these things and how to build good competitive mindsets and good competitive habits and how to take one game at a time. That isn't really explored in the space. So I would encourage you to look towards books of that nature as well, because the mental game is kind of heavily explored in sports and chess, weirdly enough, but not in card games. So I think it's a huge well of info you could tap into that maybe isn't explored enough. So.
Yeah, definitely. It's what I talked to Daya as well. It's crazy, like how much resources are out there about all of these important things that you can take advantage of as a TCG player, but not in the TCG sphere.
Yeah.
It's crazy because I am interested in sports since I'm very young. And at the moment, I'm trying to train for competing in a triathlon. And so I just naturally come across all of these resources and all of this knowledge. And I'm thinking about, like, you know what, all of these pros that I'm talking to, they need to know this.
Yeah.
Like, it's
yeah, it's something I say all the time. As you can imagine, I'm sure you get the same. You get questions about, well, I want to be a content creator. How do I do that? How do I get into content? And it's always one of the big things I have to say to people is, if you want something to be a job, you have to treat it like a job. It has to be consistency. It has to be turning up every day. It has to be doing all the stuff you don't want to do. And it's the same when it comes to these kind of mental processes and winning an event. Like, if you want to be the best of the best in the competitive trading card space now, well, everyone else wants that too. The audience is bigger than ever. The player bases are huge. Everyone wants to win. So you've got to be willing to do the things that no one else is willing to do if you really want to get every edge and squeeze the lemon for every drop that it's worth. And a lot of that comes to, okay, how do I control my sleep schedule? How do I beat jet lag? How do I eat at scheduled times so my body isn't digesting when I'm trying to think? And like, it seems very counterintuitive that it matters to this extreme, but we're at the point where people are competing for $100,000 in world championships. That's life-changing money. And if your end goal is to reach that life-changing money, you've got to be willing to change your life to do it, or you're not going to. Somebody else will.
Yeah, definitely. And even when you look at, you mentioned the prize money again here, and I think that's something very crucial to think about when you are competing in TCGs. You really need to look up, like, how much a medal is worth when you are competing in sports, when you are going to the Olympics, and then your eyes will fall down, your mouth will fall down when you see that and compare it to, like, money that is on a regular line in callings, in Pro Tours, in DLCs, and so on. It's just so crazy. And also thinking about it, that, like, being at the Olympics is like the highest of high achievements that you can have as being someone that is invested in sports. And going to the Pro Tour is something that you can do 2 times in Flesh and Blood every year.
Yeah. I think it's it goes to show there's definitely 2 different mindsets in the competitive space. There are people that are there for the money and the rewards, and then there are people that are there for the glory. And no one ends up at the Olympics for the money. People end up at the Olympics for the glory, because you want to be the best in the world. And I find that, you know, the people that make it to world championships and who succeed at world championships are typically those people, because they are there for the prestige, the moment, the spotlights. They're not there for the prize money. The prize money is just a happy side benefit. And that doesn't make it wrong to want to compete for money. You're allowed to do that, but your mindset is different when the goal is to increase your bank balance instead of just continuing to go. And there's just two very different schools of thought. They could probably learn a lot from each other if they ever wanted to try and figure it out. But typically, people fall into one or the other, and I think that's very interesting to kind of study. Because as you say, like Olympic athletes are not there for the money. Those medals are not worth what people think they are. And if they wanted to be making money, they could be doing anything else. So yeah, you've got to figure out what it is that you want in the competitive space and what the ultimate end goal is, and make the correct steps to reach it.
So when we are going a few steps away from the competitive aspect of TCGs, and we look at the community, for example, I often hear that there are more toxic communities and there are also more inviting communities. And I want to hear your opinion on this, being active for so long in TCGs, not really on which TCG is more toxic or not, but rather like what you want communities out there to hear when they want to improve.
I think there's a bit of a stigma, as you say, around certain games communities being maybe not as welcoming as others. I typically find there are two defining factors for that. Sometimes it's just a very vocal minority, I should say. The community at whole is quite welcoming, but the people who are unwelcoming are maybe just a bit louder and more on social media than the rest. But sometimes it just comes down to how old and how experienced that community is as well. I think a lot of what Flesh and Blood has managed to succeed in is the fact it initially appealed to card game veterans as its audience, which means that nearly everyone who stayed has done this before. They've dealt with the toxicity, they've dealt with the childish drama, and they're too damn old to want to do that now. So it happens much less than, let's say, the current recent Twitter arguments about whether or not Pokémon or Yu-Gi-Oh is a harder card game, which we see more of the kind of playful banter in those kind of spaces, because people are more inclined to kind of lead into the drama, want to be heels, and kind of spin that up. I don't think either is necessarily wrong. I think, again, in a way, I think it's kind of nice that there's a diversity. If you're the kind of person that's like, yeah, I would like to go in and do some shit talking, and like, I am the best, and like, I'm going to show you I'm the best, and you're crap because of X, Y, and Z. There's games that you can do that in, and it's more socially acceptable, and there's games that you would never dare to do that in because you would be seen as an asshole, which is completely fine. But I think if you're part of a community and you're looking to kind of actively make changes in the space, I think all you can really do in that capacity is lead by example, which sounds very reductionist and arguably a bit intuitive. But Rome wasn't built in a day, as they say. Like, all you can really do is lead from the front. If you want someone to be more accepting, if you want the space to cut, verbiage out that's maybe a bit outdated and offensive, or you just want, someone to not worry about how they're being referred to at your local game store, you got to be the one to call that out. You got to be the one to not stick your head in the sand. I find there's a good number of people who, hey, it doesn't affect me. It's not affecting my experience, so I'm just going to ignore it. Well, if you want it to be better, and you actually actively want it to be better, it does affect you, and you have to say something. Because if you don't, then everyone else gets a free pass, and everything just kind of gets to fly. So there's no golden recipe, there's no magic rule. Communities don't get better overnight. There will always be people who are disingenuous and unfortunately are negative to the community as a whole, but all you can do to counteract that is to be the change you want to see. And I've kind of pride myself on that as well. So I'm doing my best to be very vocal from the front in all of these communities, because again, card games are a place for everybody. They should be a place for everyone. You should feel safe, you should feel welcome. And if me saying that offends you, then maybe you don't want to be in the community that I'm in anyway.
So then when you are looking at a few years in the future, and people are looking online and seeing your face, what do you want them to see? Not really like what
not
the
physicality.
Yeah.
I hope that my legacy is mostly as someone who knew what was important to them and didn't give up. Because the ultimate goal. I've gone on record on a few podcasts to say this, but for me, the ultimate goal is just to be able to open my own little store. You know, if I want to lead this from the front and be able to make sure those tables exist for people for the rest of the time, I have to do that physically too, sometime eventually. And so that would be lovely. But I want people to be able to look back and go, yeah, that's the I got into the game because of that guy's content. I got into the space because of them. I felt safe because of them. Or more importantly, just that when everyone else was being a bit of an asshole, somebody was leading the good fight. Nothing gets to me more. I've had a few occasions. I sat down at the Calling Liverpool last year, and the player next to me was like, "Excuse me, sorry, are you Howling Minds?" It's like, "Yeah, no, how you doing?" It's like, "Yeah, I'm actually playing because of you," and that never gets normal. If it ever gets normal, I should retire because I'm wasting it. It should be a magic moment because they knew me from my time back in Marvel Snap when I was working for Marvel Snap Zone, and they were like, well, I enjoyed your content there so much that I looked at what else you were doing. And you were making Flesh and Blood content, so I watched it. And now I'm here playing Flesh and Blood because you were as well. And I can't begin to tell you how that feels when someone tells you that. You are directly responsible for a change in their life that you hope made it better, but maybe not. Probably cost them more money. But a positive change, and that's all I ever want. If people can come to me and tell me about all of the memories and the stories they have made because they were introduced something because of me, I will be happy till the day that I die. So that's the hope. That's why I hope the legacy is, I suppose.
Perfect. I think I have to say you are doing a great job at this at the moment, and I just can wish you all the best of luck for not only this year but the years ahead.
I'll do my best, and hopefully I'm around for you all to see it. Fingers crossed, and no, I appreciate the kind words, and I'm glad that I've in some way at least helped make your experience in the space a little bit better as well, in a small part, I hope. So.
Yeah, definitely. I remember the first time we really talked to each other was at the Calling in Antwerp, I think. And it was really, really a great moment for me because being on Twitter in that year so often, I was seeing your name again and again. I saw videos of yours, and I was also hearing your name from other players talking to me "Oh, do you know this guy? He's amazing." And so I was really happy to meet you, but then also to see in the last year that you were just going a good road.
I'm doing my best. I'm enjoying the roller coaster while it's going so well, and hope. All I can hope is that as I had the pleasure of meeting yourself some time ago before it all started going so well. There was a time when it wasn't going so well. It was hard. Making content was costing me a lot more money than it was making me, and I was having to make do with a lamp I pulled out of a skip and and whatever to make it work. And I just hope that anyone who's been watching that from the start knows that if that is something you want to do, it can be done. I never want to hear someone get told by their parents they can't make a living doing what they want to do and doing what they love, because I don't care where you came from. I don't care what your financial situation is like. There's always a way. And I want you to know that because I found that way. It can be done. You just got to keep going, keep pushing. And the fact that I've got so many people along for the journey who are clearly enjoying it while I'm figuring it all out means that I'm doing something right. So yeah, it's been an honor to be the one that gets to do all of this, and hopefully there's a lot more people after me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think someone listening to this can also learn so much from you because, as you said, you were going through such a hard time at some point in your life in the last years. And so what you said a lot of the good words already, but what was it really that was making you go a step further?
I lost my entire social network. I made the unfortunate mistake of being so invested in this industry that my entire friend group, my whole support network was basically built into a game store I was working for. And unfortunately, I had some moral disagreements with that store. They chose to fire me, and I didn't just lose my job. I lost everything. All my friends that I thought I had, it was still their home. They didn't want to stop going because I wasn't there anymore. And suddenly I had nothing left. And I just felt so impassioned about this space and the importance of the card game industry, the tabletop industry, that I had to find a way to stay. I had to make it work somehow. And that's how I got myself back into content. I just started streaming Magic games on Twitch because I needed a way to interact with the space. I didn't want to let it go. It was just that important to me, and I've never lost sight of that light the whole time. It has always been about paying it forward and making sure that the next time there's a young kid in a cold warehouse who has nowhere else to go, well, maybe I can give him somewhere to go, and that's just the only thing that gets me out of bed in the morning. I got photos of stores and stuff above my desk because when I sit down to work, I can look at what I'm working for. I've got photos from events I've been to and community members I've met and cards they've signed and altars they've given me and stuff all along my fireplace because I want to see it every day. Because if I see it every day, it reminds me what I'm getting up and what I'm doing it for.
Yeah. It's very difficult, right? What you are talking about, because when you are talking about opening up your own store, you're not talking about, I'm doing it in the next 5 months.
No,
you are talking about a big goal.
I've been working on that for literal years at this point. And as I said, as kind of alluded, I don't come from money. My parents weren't particularly well off or anything, so I got to save that up the hard way. No bank wants to give a self-employed person a loan in this current day and age. It's just not how the economy looks like. So every day I make the bank number go up. If I can make the number go up, I am closer to a store, and that's it. It's as simple as that. If I can keep heading in the right direction, it doesn't matter how long it takes. I'm going to get there. So I can keep getting up, and I can keep doing it.
So when someone is listening to this and wants to support you, or maybe even just wants to get a coaching session with you how can someone do that?
If you'd like to reach out to me more, I'm always happy to talk. I'm happy to look over like articles you've written and stuff as well. If you're kind of getting into the space and you just want a set of experienced eyes, you can reach out to me on any social media channel. You can find me at Howling Minds on Twitter or X, whichever you prefer. I'm on Blue Sky as howlingminds.com. You can find me on Discord at Howling Minds, or just walk up to me at an event. I'm always wearing a stupid hat. I probably have a TCG player shirt on at some point. I might even be in the booth if you're lucky. But if you want to talk, you want advice, you want coaching, you want anything else, just reach out, have a chat. I'm always terminally online because I'm at my desk so much. I will get back to you. I'm always happy to talk. So.
And are you also having something like a Patreon?
No, truthfully, now that all of my work goes through TCG Player primarily as my primary employer, they kind of get first dibs on stuff. And anything else I do for other clients, if that's Legend Story Studios, if that's Ravensburger for Lorcana, obviously I do it directly with them, so it's less of a my platform kind of thing. So I'm not like looking for like financial support or anything like that. I guess if that's something that you're interested in supporting in the future, I'm sure a day will come where I decide to like kickstart the rest of the money needed for the store or something when I'm a bit closer in general. And if you're interested in maybe supporting me in the long term, perhaps maybe follow me on those social media channels, and trust me, when I'm ready to pull the trigger on everything and it's already, I'll be screaming it from the rooftops. You will not be able to miss it. You will hear me. So if you're interested in the rest of the journey, well, hop along and keep reading the story, I suppose, and maybe we can finish it together.
Let's talk about that story actually then, because when you are painting that picture and when you are looking at the things that you achieved so far, like what is your store, like what are the most important parts of your store that you're imagining?
I have a few things in mind that I think are non-negotiable. I need to be in a university town or like a university city, because for me, a lot of the mission statement is giving people a home away from home, and who needs that more than students who are like moving away from home for the first time and trying to find themselves and the like. So that's a bit of a non-negotiable one. I need to be in a student-heavy area for business and for the mission statement. I want to be a cafe board game store. For me, I think it's important to be able to give people somewhere just like warm, be able to give them a cup of coffee and a slice of cake when it's been a bit of a crap day. But it also means you can be open as a coffee shop during the day and kind of enjoy the foot traffic and stuff, and be more open for events in the evening and the like. Beyond that, I want to be able to just have a comfortable play space. I'm sure so many people that are listening relate to this, but when you've been in the card game space long enough, you've traveled to enough events and stores where the chairs are cramped, the tables suck. Like, I'm getting too old for this now. My back can't do plastic garden chairs and stuff. Like, so that's non-negotiable. Like, if I'm putting good money in, it's about making sure it's comfortable, it's spaced out, it's stuff that's gonna last. And I think, truthfully, I've got this vision in my head. I'm lucky that my mother is an artist, so she can help me with this, but the mission statement, I've said it so many times on the broadcast, is that everyone deserves a place at the table. So I want to be able to like carve or like maybe wood burn names into a literal table. I want there to be a physical embodiment of all the people who made that happen. I want there to be somewhere you can look that is like all of these people brought this store to life. So I want that. That's a bit of a pipe dream. We'll see. But, you know, I have other ideas. I want to be able to have like a pay it forward wall where if you want to buy a drink or a snack for someone, you can, and it can just be collected by someone who's maybe a little hard up and doesn't have the ability to afford that. Maybe even pay forward some products and stuff if you like, because you want to be able to share your hobbies that you enjoy with people. These are all things I want to explore. But truthfully, they need to be fleshed out a little more. Step one is getting the money. Step one is making sure it can happen, and then we can figure out how practical all of the dreams are. But yeah, I need to be with university students. I need to be able to feed people, and I need to run good events. And those are the non-negotiables.
Yeah. So when we're looking beyond the non-negotiables, I know that I think when building a business, there's also a term of like try to fly high and then land somewhere that you didn't think you could land at. So the first thing that comes to my mind actually is like a TCG shop where you can also work out. Maybe that's like a crazy idea, but
yeah, I'm not sure how much cross-pollination there is there. Like I'm sure there is some demand for both, but yeah, I think there is definitely room to kind of bring hobbies together and bring spaces together in that environment, because typically card game stores are open in the evenings because people finish work and they want to come down after work and they want to jam some games with their friends and grab a drink and stuff. So that leaves you with all of the day to do something else. So I think there is definitely room to explore there in how you monetize that by making the most of something else during the day, be that coffee shop, be that a gym, be that something else, and then focusing on being a store in the evenings. But again, I'll figure out all the details when we're a little bit closer. So
yeah. So we talked about one interesting part about the TCG world throughout the pod again and again, and that is like the so-called investment, or better said, the speculation on this side of the hobby. And you're trying to build up for your own game store, but you are not really the person that is backing on like trying to get money out of the cards. Like,
not at all.
Maybe you can talk about your mindset a little bit. Sure. Why don't you do that?
I want to be very vocal that I don't think there is anything wrong with that. In fact, I wouldn't be trying to open a store if I thought that was the case. If you're in it to run a business and to be profitable, absolutely. But I think it's fairly clear that's just not my priority. My priority is to make sure there is a space for people. I would be happy if the lights stayed on. I don't need to make a buck doing it. I just need it to pay for itself so that place exists. If I was financially driven in that way, sure. I mean, I would be buying more singles on the market and flipping them now and trying to make a profit. And sure, I do some of that. You know, I travel to enough events. I get promos I don't need. I can pass them on to kind of pay for things. But it's never an active interest. It's never something I'm actively chasing just because it's not the priority. It's never been the goal. I'm not interested in trying to make a quick buck. I'm not interested in trying to fleece people or stick something in a cupboard for 5 years and hope it appreciates in value, because I could spend that money better now to travel to more events and shake more hands and meet more people and do more things. And I think the connections I can build, the stories I can tell, the content I can make that resonates with people is a much better way for me to spend that money and invest in my future than taking a chance on any particular product.
Yeah, perfect. Then that's food for thought for everyone trying to take another step on that road. But definitely, I think it's an important message to get out. I think I have, covered all of the topics that I wanted to talk about. But is there anything else that you want to talk about in the end?
No, honestly, we've talked about more things than I expected us to today. So I'm very happy to have done so. It's been a lovely conversation, and I guess all I'll say is if you have other things you want to talk about in the future, or anyone listening does, just come and have a chat with me. I can. They literally pay me to talk on the internet, so yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. So feel free to come and chat.
Perfect. Yeah, it was a lovely conversation for me as well. Really enjoyed the time, and I also want to give you the space to shout out anyone here in the end.
Yeah, I'll give out a shout out to a few people, I suppose. I shout outs first of all to TCG Player. I know sometimes they come across like a big corporate entity, but I'm not in the position I'm in now and the platform that I have without them. They took a chance on me as a writer very early, and I thank them greatly for that. So huge respect. By all means, consider supporting them if you have the ability to do so, and if you're based in the US. I have huge amounts of local friends who keep me ticking over and playing card games, be that the likes of Ryan, Josh, Legs, and Chris, my locals who play Flesh and Blood and Yu-Gi-Oh! And everything else, be it the Manchester scene in the UK, who are very Flesh and Blood centric, the likes of Liam Holden, even the likes of Rob Catton, multiple Worlds top 8s and the like. They're very close friends of mine. George Jones, James Brooks, and the list could go on forever. All of you know who you are. You're incredible. I don't want to take up 35 minutes of podcast firing off every name. And the last big one, whenever I get the chance, a huge thank you, honestly, to my parents, because never once have they told me I was stupid for giving up on a mainstream dream. My mum pursued a chance to be an artist. She's my inspiration. She gave me permission to do something that I love for a living. And my dad, as much as he's never quite understood the artistic side, that man gave his life to keep a roof over my head when we were younger, when things were a little harder. And I don't have the chance to explore this and be in this space if he doesn't work so hard to make sure that I don't have to work so hard now. So always huge props to my parents for giving me the chance to run it. So yeah, they're always my favorite shout outs.
Perfect. Thank you so much, man. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for taking the time. And to all the viewers, we see us in the next one.
Thanks for having me.